Hey, everybody. We're talking with Gary Chapman today, the author of the book, The 5 Love Languages, The Secret to Love That Lasts. Of all of the interviews I've done so far, this is one of my favorite already because I both like Gary's combination of humility and sort of ease in conversation and the many reps he has in helping people uncover what's going on in your marriage and your relationship. Gary, let's get right in to these 5 love languages. I'd love to just practically spend about 3 or 4 minutes on each of them. Have you describe what is it really behind the word you've named it, and how can people tell if that is in fact their primary language, and what are some ways that it looks like in a relationship? If your wife's language is words of affirmation, what are some ways you can behave yourself into a better love relationship with her? Let's talk about words of affirmation.
Yeah, words of affirmation is simply using words to affirm the other person. You look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. One of the things I like about you, it's simply using words to affirm the other person. You can focus on the way they look, on something they have done for you, on a character trait, on a personality trait, on anything. It's just looking for things that you can affirm the other person for. There's an ancient Hebrew proverb that says life and death is in the power of the tongue. You can kill your spouse by the way you talk to them, or you can give them life. So I say to the ladies, you give your husband a positive word, there's something inside of him that wants to be better. You give him a critical word, there's something inside of him that wants to shoot you. So words of affirmation, and for some people, this is their primary love language. As I indicated earlier in the first part of our program, each of the languages have different dialects. So there's different kinds of words. You can give encouraging words. You almost did that, babe. That was really close. Or you can give, words of challenge. I really like the way things are moving in our relationship. Just anything. And you can not only speak the words, you can write the words. Sometimes written words are very powerful. Or you could sing the words if you can sing. But it's simply using words to affirm the other person. For some people, this is what makes them feel loved.
Stand by, but I'm pretty confident. I've always felt like this was my love language. I like to be appreciated, recognized, thanked. And it's tough, right? When your wife and you are raising 3 boys that are bouncing off the sofas and destroying things by the minute. It's tough to have, quality time when you're not screaming. Is there any reason why this was listed as the first of the 5 languages, Gary?
No, they're in no particular order.
They're not. Okay. No. Let's talk about the second love language, acts of service.
Acts of service is doing something for the other person that they would like for you to do. In a marriage, it would be such things as cooking a meal. That is a huge act of service, cooking a meal. My son didn't get married until he was 34. People would ask him, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? He would say, when you grow up in the home of a marriage counselor, you're very careful. But eventually he did get married. And he said, Dad, I got a bonus. I found out Amy likes to cook. I never thought I'd find a girl that likes to cook. Then my daughter met a man that likes to cook. My kids got it made on the cooking deal. But it's cooking, it's washing dishes, it's vacuuming floors, it's washing the car, it's walking the dog, it's mowing the grass, it's changing the baby's diaper. Ooh, big act of service on that one. Anything that your spouse would like for you to do. How do you know what they would like? Listen to them. They're already asking for it and often complaining that you don't do it. So anything that that they would like for you to do. There's an old saying, Scott, you probably remember this, actions speak louder than words. It's true if this is their love language. It's not true for everyone, but if acts of service is your love language, actions do speak louder than words.
Gary, is there any misconception when people think this is their spouse's love language, they do this versus they should do that? Give us some parameters to say, be mindful of this, watch out.
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes we can have preconceived ideas that if this is their love language and these are the things that they want, but maybe there are other things that would be more meaningful to them. And so the best thing to do is ask, honey, on a scale of 0 to 10, if I take the trash out every morning without you asking me, how would that rank with your love tank? If she says 10, you better know, man, you're on track if you take the trash out. But if she says, oh, it's only about a 2, then you know, yes, she appreciates it, but that's not a big deal for her. So it's better to ask and know rather than to guess or to use your own assumptions as to what would make them feel loved.
You know, Gary, I have a good friend outside of Denver, Deb Hauk, who once told me that, I'm going to get this story exactly not right, but Deb talked about how she was throwing a 50th birthday party for her husband, Rex, and she threw this phenomenal party with all of his friends and family and such, and she just went overboard doing this amazing party to celebrate him, threw herself at it wholly. And they fell into bed, and she said to Rex, I think I had the story right, how did you love your party? And he said, loosely quoted, Deb, you threw me the party you wanted for your 50th birthday. And they're still happily married today. But I think it's a good example, right, of understanding what kind of party did Rex want. I love surprise parties. I threw my wife one, and we didn't speak the entire time with 30 people in our home. Right? Yeah. Let's talk not about that anymore. Let's talk about the third love language is receiving gifts.
It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. As we mentioned earlier, my academic background before I studied counseling was anthropology, the study of cultures. We have never discovered a culture where gift giving is not an expression of love. It's universal. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got for me. The gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. Now, I remind you, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. But they don't have to be expensive. I say to guys, guys, in the summertime, in the spring, you can get flowers free. Just go out in your backyard and pick one. That's what your kids do. How many mothers have ever received a dandelion from your kids? And I say to the guys, I'm not suggesting dandelions, okay? And if you don't have flowers in your backyard, your neighbor's yard, ask them. They'll give you a flower.
I think my wife's love language is designer purses, as it would evidence by her closet and safe. But I need to go back home tonight and talk to her about that. Gary, what do you do when the budget's tight and you got 3 kids in college or you've got 3 kids in school and money's not as plentiful and in your spouse's language is gifts? What are some tips around when the resources are less plentiful than they were when you were courting and dating?
Yeah, I think 2 things I would say. One is to say to her, honey, I really thought about and I really would like to buy this for you. As you and I both know, we don't have the money this month to do that. But I want you to know it's in my heart. And I'm going to do a little extra work over here, and as soon as I get the money, I'm going to get that for you. And if she's already indicated that's something she really would like, the intent will speak to her until you're able to save up enough money to do it. The other thing I would say is to say to her, here's where we are. You know where we are financially, but and some things I can't do, but there are some things I can do. I want you to know I was thinking about you when I was walking down the street today. And this feather just kind of blew on the street right beside him, and I picked it up because it reminded me that you are the wing beneath my feathers, beneath my life. I just want you to know I'm telling you, the feather will speak to her. You just give her a little story about it, what went through your mind when you found it. So those are things I'd suggest.
Our guest today is Gary Chapman, the amazing author, friend, mentor, guide, coach, light of the book, The 5 Love Languages, The Secret to Love That Lasts. We're talking about all 5 love languages: words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, and now the 4th one is quality time. Gary, talk about that.
Giving your spouse your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting on the couch watching television, or sitting on the couch and both of you are on your computers, your iPads, or your phone's in front of you. I'm talking about sitting on the couch with the TV off, computers down, you're not answering your phone, you're looking at each other, and you're talking to each other. Undivided attention. Or taking a walk down the road, just the 2 of you, and talking. Or going out to eat, assuming that you talk. Scott, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but In a restaurant, you can almost always tell the difference between dating couples and married couples. Dating couples will look at each other and talk. Married couples often sit there and eat.
The entire production crew here is laughing. All the guys in the studio are going to go home and find some way to tell their wife, how they love them and uncover their love language. Gary, quality time, does it mean different things to men and women? Any advice you might just polarize the two genders to say, women, most men want this in time, and most men want this?
Well, I think more women lean toward in-depth conversations, and men would lean more toward another dialect of this language, and that is doing things with them, the two of them doing things, maybe planting a garden together or going to an event together, or in which he's giving her attention. But the important thing is not the event or not the project they're working on. It's that they're doing it together. So, again, there are different dialects in this language as well as the other languages. The important thing for each couple is to discover not only the primary love language, but what dialects within that language really communicate more deeply to your spouse.
Gary, it's so true because I like to garden. And unfortunately, my wife and I have nearly an acre of land around our house that's all like gardenable. And I just wanted to come out and pretend to garden. She hates gardening. And I just wanted to come out and kind of pretend to pick weeds, or I like to read, and I'll say, hey, come out to the sunroom and read with me. She's like, well, why would I come out and sit and read? Well, I just want you to sit next to me and read. She's like, that's the stupidest thing ever.
Yeah. It's togetherness, even though you're not communicating verbally with each other, but there's something about she chooses to be there with you, and that's what quality time is all about.
Maybe I'll buy my wife a Gucci gardening bag. That work? I'll Google that and
That's
see.
an idea.
Okay, let's talk about the last one. Every guy listening, and lots of women, including my wife, physical touch. Talk about why that's so prominent, and when you mentioned earlier, when sometimes it's a bit of a misconception. It's not always sex.
Yeah, we've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies. We hold them, we kiss them, we cuddle them. Long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. A lot of research done in European orphanages years ago determined clearly children that are picked up and touched tenderly fare better emotionally than children who lie there in the crib for 3 or 4 hours and nobody bothers to touch them. So it's all these languages apply to children as well as a marriage relationship. But in a marriage, this would be such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, yes, the whole sexual part of the marriage, arm around the shoulder, driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, sitting around the house and they walk by, you trip them. I'm kidding on the last one, okay? Don't trip your spouse. It's affirming touches. And you're right. Some people, this is their language, and these kind of touches are very, very meaningful to them. You don't give them touch because you didn't grow up in a touchy family. Mm-hmm. They don't feel love. Mm-hmm. You can say, I love you, but they're not feeling it because their love language is physical touch.
Everyone who is listening to this radio program or podcast, you need to go onto Amazon or your local bookstore and pick up another copy of this book, The 5 Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. The languages are words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch, and helping you uncover what is your language and telling your partner or spouse what that is, and then asking them what is theirs. Gary, were there any languages left on the cutting floor? Why did you choose 5 versus 6?
Those are the 5 that grew out of my reading of my several years of notes in my counseling. I was not dogmatic to say that there's only 5, but since the book's been out this long and people have come to me with ideas, one guy said, there's a 6th love language. I said, what is it? He said, chocolate. I said, well, if they bought it, it's a gift. If they made it, it's an act of service, One guy said the 6th love language is shopping with his wife. I said, well, that sounds to me like quality time. It's a dialect of quality time. So no one has come to me with one that I think is a valid 6th love language, but I'm still open, okay?
I'll be your co-author on that version. Gary,
all right.
Gary, how do you take these concepts and apply them, if appropriate, into the workplace? For the millions of professionals who are listening to our program as leaders of teams, what's an appropriate application, if any, in a work environment?
Well, there's a huge application of this. As a matter of fact, I wrote a book with Dr. Paul White as my co-author. He's a psychologist who had 20 years experience working with businesses. It's called The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. And essentially, we just took the love languages to work. Now, the only place we got pushback from the HR people was on physical touch. Okay? No, we don't touch in the workplace. Don't touch. and we acknowledge that the whole thing of sexual abuse in the workplace is really a real factor today. And almost no one had physical touch as their primary appreciation language. We're calling it appreciation at work rather than love.
Sure. Because
a work relationship is different from a family relationship, but it's the same basic concept. And what we discovered from other research, not research we did, 70% of the people who have a job say they feel little to no appreciation coming from the people with whom and for whom they work. And 64% of the people who leave a job and go to another job say they left primarily because they didn't feel appreciated. So it's a huge area of need, expressing appreciation. And what we found in our own research is most managers will say, "Oh, I appreciate my people. Oh, yeah, I tell them all the time I appreciate them." And we say, you tell them. You're hitting about 40% of your people at the most. Because for 40%, maybe 40% of them, words of affirmation is their language, but you're missing the others. It's the words just roll off them like water off a duck's back. So, yeah, that book we're having a great response to from managers and business people.
So I say to Drew and Jen and Travis and Deb and Zach and Annie and everyone else working with me, I appreciate you, all that you do to keep this radio program going so well and so smoothly in the podcast. Thank you for all you're doing in launching my book. I'm honored to work with you. Gary, let's do a quick round here. Some quick questions, quick answers. Can you love someone you hate?
I think you can if you understand that love itself is not an emotion. Love stimulates emotions, but love is the attitude which says, how can I help them? How can I help you? What can I do that would enrich your life? It's an attitude. So you can have an emotional sense of dislike for the person, typically because of something they've done against you or that hurt you, but you can still have a loving attitude with loving actions in spite of the fact that you have negative feelings.
Any advice you give parents on how to better communicate and understand what are their children's love languages so they can improve their relationship with them?
Yeah, I think this is extremely important. And this was the second book in my series, The 5 Love Languages of Children. I wrote it with a psychiatrist, Dr. Ross Campbell, who had 30 years experience working with children. Same 5 love languages. And the question is not to parents, do you love your children? The question is, do your children feel loved? Most parents love their children, but a lot of children don't feel loved. And so you can learn a child's love language, Scott, by the time they're 4 years old by just observing their behavior. When my son was that age, I'd come home in the afternoon. He'd run to the door, grab my leg, and climb on me. He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Our daughter never did that. She would say, "Daddy, come into my room. I want to show you something." She wanted quality time. So if you observe their behavior, you can discover a child's love language at least by the time they're 4 years old.
In fact, you write in the opening, Dr. Chapman, about the necessity to understand your emotional love tank of your child, right? And are you filling it? And you share a horrifying story about a young woman who's 13, who I think was dealing with an STD because she wasn't feeling love from her dad and went out and found love from some guy she thought loved her. And it was I had to stop the book, not because it was so maybe surprising, it was just so enlightening as I thought about my 3 boys. Am I and my wife uncovering their love language, and are we constantly replenishing our child's emotional love tank?
Extremely important with children and teenagers that you give heavy doses of the primary love language, then sprinkle in the other 4. because we want the child to learn how to receive love and give love in all 5 languages. That's the healthiest adult. But most of us did not receive all 5 growing up. But the good news is you can learn to speak these languages as an adult, even if you did not receive them as a child. So, but yeah, I think for teenagers, especially in those years, and if they feel loved, life is going to be much easier. If they don't feel loved, it's going to be really troubled waters.
Dr. Chapman, this has been an honor to be with you. I've spent the better part of my 30 years around authors, CEOs, business titans, celebrities. I was very excited, genuinely giddy this morning about having you on the program. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for the book. What's next for you?
Well, Scott, I'm always working on things, and what I just released is a book for young men, ages approximately 11 to 18. It's called Choose Greatness, 11 Wise Decisions That Brave Young Men Make. The thesis is the decisions a young man makes in those years will greatly impact the rest of his life.
Wow.
I wrote it with an African-American friend of mine, Clarence Schuler. We're hoping that this will get into the African-American community as well as the Anglo and Hispanic community and help young men get on the right track during those early years of their life.
Well, I'd be honored to endorse that book and have him on our program as well. Gary Chapman, I hope you live to 120 so you can sell 50 million copies of this book. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Good to be with you. Keep up the good work.